History is often a tapestry woven from the achievements of those whose names resonate through time. Figures like Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, Thomas Edison, and Nikola Tesla, whose contributions to science and technology are celebrated worldwide. Yet, within the shadows of these luminaries lie the stories of unsung heroes, individuals whose groundbreaking work shaped the modern world but whose names have faded into obscurity. Among them is Eleanor Ames, a visionary whose pioneering advancements in hydroelectric power transformed the energy landscape, yet whose legacy remains largely unrecognized. This is the story of a woman who defied the constraints of her era, reshaped the future, and was nearly erased from the annals of history. A spark of genius in a restrictive world. Eleanor Ames was born on March 12, 1872, in Newford, a quaint town in Massachusetts nestled along the banks of the Merrimack River. Her father, Charles Ames, was a prosperous banker whose wealth afforded the family a life of privilege. Her mother, Margaret, was a refined woman who adhered to the social expectations of the time, prioritizing domesticity and decorum. In an era when women's roles were largely confined to the home, Eleanor's upbringing was both a blessing and a challenge. While her family's affluence provided access to resources, the societal norms of the late 19th century imposed rigid limitations on women's ambitions. From an early age, Eleanor exhibited an extraordinary intellect and an insatiable curiosity. Unlike her peers, who were content with needlework or piano lessons, Eleanor was drawn to the mysteries of the natural world. Her father, though traditional in many respects, recognized her potential and encouraged her intellectual pursuits. He provided her with tutors in mathematics, physics, and chemistry, subjects deemed unconventional for women. By the age of 10, Eleanor was reading treatises on mechanics and conducting simple experiments in the family's garden shed, much to her mother's chagrin. The Industrial Revolution was reshaping the world during Eleanor's childhood. Factories hummed with steam-powered machinery, and the promise of electricity was beginning to illuminate cities. Yet, the reliance on coal and oil troubled Eleanor. She was acutely aware of the environmental toll. Smoke-filled skies and polluted rivers were stark reminders of humanity's impact. At the age of 12, while accompanying her father on a trip to Niagara Falls, Eleanor witnessed the raw power of cascading water. The sight ignited a lifelong fascination with hydroelectric energy, a concept still in its infancy. She resolved to explore how nature's forces could be harnessed to generate clean, sustainable power. A mind ahead of its time. By her mid-teens, Eleanor was immersed in the study of hydroelectric power. She devoured the works of early pioneers like William George Armstrong, who had experimented with water-driven turbines in England. However, the technology was rudimentary, and many dismissed it as impractical compared to the established dominance of fossil fuels. Undeterred, Eleanor began sketching designs for turbines and generators, using her allowance to purchase materials for small-scale models. Her bedroom became a laboratory, cluttered with gears, wires, and wooden prototypes. Eleanor's passion was not without obstacles. Her mother, fearing that her daughter's unconventional interests would render her unmarriageable, urged her to focus on social graces. At local gatherings, Eleanor's talk of turbines and energy conversion was met with polite smiles or outright dismissal. Even her tutors, though impressed by her aptitude, cautioned her against pursuing a field dominated by men. "Science is no place for a lady," one remarked, echoing the sentiments of the era. At 16, Eleanor achieved her first significant breakthrough. Using a small stream near her home, she constructed a miniature hydroelectric generator capable of powering a single light bulb. The device, though simple, was a testament to her ingenuity. She invited her father to witness the demonstration, and his pride was palpable. Yet, when Eleanor sought to share her work with local engineers, she was met with skepticism. "A woman's toy," one scoffed, refusing to examine her designs. The rejection stung, but it also fueled her determination. In the autumn of 1890, at the age of 18, Eleanor Ames embarked on a journey that would test the limits of her intellect and resilience. She enrolled at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, a prestigious institution that had only recently begun admitting women under intense scrutiny and with considerable reluctance. Her acceptance was a hard-won triumph, the culmination of years of self-directed study and her father's advocacy. Charles Ames, though progressive in his support for Eleanor's education, faced criticism from his social circle for allowing his daughter to pursue such an unconventional path. Yet, for Eleanor, MIT represented a gateway to a world of scientific discovery, a world she had long dreamed of joining. The reality of MIT, however, was far from the egalitarian ideal Eleanor had envisioned. As one of only 6 female students in a sea of over 1,000 men, her presence was an anomaly, often met with a mixture of curiosity, condescension, and outright hostility. The lecture halls, with their towering blackboards and rows of wooden benches, were designed for a male-dominated academic culture. Professors, many of whom viewed women's education as a distraction, frequently overlooked Eleanor's raised hand or dismissed her questions with perfunctory responses. Her male classmates, emboldened by the era's gender norms, treated her as an interloper. Whispers followed her through the corridors. "What is she doing here?" or "She'll never last," and collaborative study groups, essential for mastering complex coursework, excluded her without apology. Despite these challenges, Eleanor excelled academically. Her coursework in mechanics, thermodynamics, and electrical engineering revealed a mind capable of synthesizing abstract theory with practical application. She spent countless hours in the library, poring over texts by Faraday, Maxwell, and Helmholtz, and sketching designs for turbines in the margins of her notebooks. Her determination was fueled by a deep-seated belief that science could transcend societal barriers, a belief that was repeatedly tested by the realities of her environment. One of the most formative experiences of Eleanor's time at MIT occurred during her second year, in the spring of 1892, when she was invited to present a paper at the university's annual engineering symposium. The event, attended by faculty, students, and prominent engineers from Boston's industrial elite, was a rare opportunity for undergraduates to showcase their work. Eleanor's paper, titled Optimizing Hydroelectric Turbine Efficiency Through Geometric Redesign, was a meticulous study grounded in rigorous mathematical modeling. She proposed a novel turbine blade configuration that could increase energy output by 20% while reducing mechanical stress. The analysis was innovative, blending principles of fluid dynamics with engineering pragmatism, and Eleanor spent weeks refining her presentation, anticipating the scrutiny she would face. On the day of the symposium, Eleanor stood before a packed auditorium, her voice steady despite the weight of countless eyes upon her. The audience, composed almost entirely of men, listened in an uneasy silence. Her slides, hand-drawn with precision, illustrated the turbine's design and performance metrics. When she concluded, the moderator, Professor Henry Caldwell, offered a curt, "Thank you, Miss Ames," and promptly moved to the next presenter. No questions were invited, no discussion ensued. The dismissal was palpable, and Eleanor returned to her seat, her face composed but her heart heavy with disappointment. Weeks later, the sting of rejection deepened when a male classmate, Robert Thornton, presented a strikingly similar paper at a regional engineering conference. Thornton's work, which replicated Eleanor's blade design with minor modifications, was hailed as a breakthrough. He received a commendation from the faculty and an internship offer from a prominent firm. Eleanor, who had shared her early drafts with Thornton in a study group, was devastated by the betrayal. When she confronted him, he shrugged, claiming her ideas were common knowledge. The incident was a bitter lesson in the systemic barriers she faced. Not only was her work undervalued because of her gender, but it was also vulnerable to appropriation by those with greater social capital. Outside the academic sphere, Eleanor's personal life was equally isolating. Her mother, Margaret, intensified her campaign to see Eleanor married, viewing her daughter's academic pursuits as a temporary indulgence that must yield to societal expectations. Margaret arranged introductions to eligible suitors, all from Newford's affluent families, who saw Eleanor's intellect as a quirk to be tolerated rather than celebrated. One suitor, Edward Langley, heir to a textile fortune, epitomized this disconnect. At a dinner hosted by the Ames family in 1891, Edward proposed after a mere 3 meetings, promising a life of luxury and social prominence. When Eleanor declined, explaining her commitment to her scientific work, Edward laughed, his tone patronizing. "You'll outgrow these hobbies, my dear," he said, assuming her ambitions were a youthful phase. The exchange crystallized the chasm between Eleanor's aspirations and the world's expectations, reinforcing her resolve to forge her own path. Eleanor's isolation was compounded by her strained relationship with her mother. Margaret, though loving, was a product of her time, believing that a woman's fulfillment lay in marriage and motherhood. Their conversations often devolved into arguments, with Margaret lamenting Eleanor's unnatural interests and Eleanor defending her right to pursue her calling. Her father, Charles, remained her staunchest ally, but even he urged caution, warning that her defiance of societal norms could lead to a life of ostracism. "You are brilliant, Eleanor," he once said, "but the world is not kind to those who challenge its rules." These words, meant as counsel, only deepened Eleanor's determination to prove the world wrong. Beyond MIT, Eleanor sought solace in the natural world, often retreating to the banks of the Merrimack River to sketch or conduct small experiments. These moments of solitude were her refuge, where she could escape the judgments of academia and society. She began corresponding with other women in science, including Ellen Swallow Richards, an MIT alumna and pioneer in environmental chemistry. Richards' letters, filled with encouragement and practical advice, became a lifeline, reminding Eleanor that she was not alone in her struggle. Yet, the scarcity of female mentors and the constant need to prove her worth took a toll, shaping Eleanor into a woman of fierce independence but also profound solitude. A breakthrough overshadowed. By 1894, at the age of 22, Eleanor had achieved a milestone that would have been celebrated had she been a man. After years of iterative design and experimentation, she developed a functional prototype for a hydroelectric generator. Constructed from brass, steel, and meticulously calibrated turbines, the device was compact yet powerful, capable of generating enough electricity to power a small workshop. The prototype was a marvel of ingenuity, incorporating a variable pitch turbine blade system that optimized energy capture across a range of water flow conditions. Eleanor tested the generator at a mill owned by her father's friend, Thomas Hargrove, where it operated flawlessly for 6 hours, illuminating the mill's workspace and driving a small lathe. The success was a personal triumph, but sharing it with the broader scientific community proved daunting. Eleanor submitted detailed manuscripts to several prestigious journals, including the Journal of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers and Scientific American. Her submissions included blueprints, performance data, and theoretical analyses, all presented with the rigor expected of a seasoned engineer. Yet, the responses were disheartening. Most journals rejected her work outright, citing vague reasons such as insufficient novelty or limited practical application. One editor, from a lesser-known publication, returned her manuscript with a handwritten note. While intriguing, this work lacks the authority of established expertise. The subtext was clear: her gender undermined her credibility. Undeterred, Eleanor sought alternative avenues to share her work. She attended local engineering society meetings, where she was often the only woman present. Her presentations, though meticulously prepared, were met with polite indifference or skeptical questions that focused more on her credentials than her ideas. At one meeting, an engineer asked, "Who assisted you with these designs, Miss Ames?" The implication that she could not have produced the work alone was a recurring slight, one that Eleanor learned to counter with calm professionalism. Recognizing the limitations of her local network, Eleanor turned to the international scientific community. She began a correspondence with European engineers, leveraging her fluency in German and French to connect with scholars abroad. One such contact, Dr. Klaus Müller, a respected German engineer specializing in fluid dynamics, responded with enthusiasm. Müller, who had published extensively on turbine design, recognized the brilliance of Eleanor's work and invited her to present at a conference in Berlin in 1895. The opportunity was tantalizing, but Eleanor faced insurmountable barriers. The cost of transatlantic travel was prohibitive, and her family, particularly her mother, opposed the idea of a young woman traveling alone to Europe. With a heavy heart, Eleanor declined, but Muller's encouragement, "Your ideas are ahead of their time, Fräulein Ames," bolstered her resolve to continue her work. To protect her designs from further dismissal, Eleanor began conducting her experiments in secret, often working late into the night in a small shed behind her family's home. She installed a rudimentary water wheel in a nearby stream, using it to test modifications to her turbine system. These clandestine efforts were both exhilarating and exhausting, as she balanced her scientific pursuits with the demands of maintaining a socially acceptable facade. Her health began to suffer. Long hours in the damp shed led to frequent colds, and the stress of constant rejection took a psychological toll. Yet, Eleanor's passion for hydroelectric power remained unshaken, driven by a vision of a world powered by clean, sustainable energy. A partnership forged in vision. The trajectory of Eleanor's career shifted dramatically in the spring of 1901, when she met Harold Whitmore, a 30-year-old engineer whose disillusionment with the coal industry mirrored her own. Their introduction occurred at a lecture on electrical engineering hosted by the Boston Society of Civil Engineers. Eleanor, attending alone, posed a series of incisive questions about the inefficiencies of steam-powered generators, catching Harold's attention. Intrigued by her knowledge, he sought her out after the lecture, and their conversation quickly turned to renewable energy. Harold, who had spent years designing coal-fired power plants, was exploring alternatives, driven by concerns about pollution and resource depletion. A mutual acquaintance, Professor James Langley, no relation to Edward, arranged for Harold to visit Eleanor's makeshift laboratory in Newford. The shed, cluttered with tools, blueprints, and half-assembled turbines, was a testament to her ingenuity. Harold was astounded by her generator, which outperformed many commercial models of the time. "This is revolutionary," he declared, studying her blueprints with a mix of awe and excitement. Unlike the academics and industrialists who had dismissed her, Harold saw Eleanor as an equal, valuing her intellect and vision. Their partnership was born from this mutual respect, marking a turning point in Eleanor's journey. Eleanor and Harold's collaboration was a synergy of complementary strengths. Harold brought practical experience, having worked on large-scale infrastructure projects, and a network of industry contacts. Eleanor contributed theoretical brilliance, with a deep understanding of fluid dynamics and electrical engineering that informed their designs. Together, they set an ambitious goal: to build a hydroelectric power station capable of supplying electricity to an entire town. The project required not only technical innovation but also the ability to navigate a skeptical and resistant industry. Their partnership was not without challenges. Industrialists, whose fortunes were tied to coal and oil, viewed renewable energy as a threat to their dominance. At meetings with potential investors, Eleanor and Harold faced dismissive attitudes, particularly toward Eleanor's involvement. One financier, Charles Rutherford, remarked, "A woman in engineering? Surely Mr. Whitmore is the mind behind this venture." Harold, to his credit, consistently corrected such assumptions, insisting that Eleanor was the project's intellectual cornerstone. Yet, the prejudice persisted, forcing Eleanor to channel her energies into the technical work while Harold handled much of the public-facing advocacy. The duo's perseverance bore fruit in 1905, when they secured funding from Abigail Thornton, a wealthy widow and philanthropist with a passion for social reform. Abigail, who had inherited her late husband's shipping fortune, was committed to causes that advanced human welfare, including public health and education. She saw hydroelectric power as a means to reduce urban pollution and improve living conditions for the working class. After a lengthy meeting with Eleanor and Harold, during which Eleanor's passion and expertise shone through, Abigail pledged $50,000 to the project, a significant sum that allowed them to establish a research facility in Newford. The Newford facility, a modest brick building near the Merrimack River, became the hub of their innovation. There, Eleanor and Harold developed a turbine system that set new standards for efficiency and environmental sustainability. The design incorporated adjustable blades that adapted to varying water flows, a novel transmission mechanism that minimized energy loss, and a modular structure that facilitated maintenance. These innovations, many of which originated in Eleanor's earlier prototypes, would later become industry benchmarks, though her name was rarely associated with them. A legacy erased, then rediscovered. In 1908, the Newford hydroelectric station was completed, a triumph of engineering and vision. Built along the Merrimack River, the station featured 3 turbines based on Eleanor's designs, capable of generating 500 kilowatts of electricity, enough to power hundreds of homes, businesses, and streetlights in Newford. The station's opening was a local sensation, drawing journalists, dignitaries, and curious residents. For Eleanor, it was the culmination of nearly 2 decades of struggle, a moment when her vision of clean energy became reality. Yet, the narrative of the station's success quickly shifted away from Eleanor. The project's primary financial backer, industrialist Samuel Grayson, positioned himself as the driving force behind the venture. Grayson, a shrewd businessman with investments in railroads and manufacturing, saw the station as a means to enhance his public image. Press coverage, influenced by Grayson's connections, focused on his bold investment and Harold's technical expertise. Eleanor's contributions were marginalized, her name appearing only in passing as a collaborator. At the opening ceremony, she prepared to deliver a speech outlining the station's technical innovations, but Grayson's team intervened, insisting that a woman's presence on the podium would distract from the event's gravitas. She was politely ushered aside, her voice silenced. The erasure of Eleanor's role was not an isolated incident but part of a broader pattern. As the Newford station proved the viability of hydroelectric power, similar facilities proliferated across the United States and beyond. Engineers adopted the turbine principles pioneered by Eleanor, often through Harold's publications, which he insisted on co-authoring with her. However, her name was frequently omitted in citations, and subsequent innovations built on her work credited others. By the 1910s, hydroelectric power was transforming industries and communities, but Eleanor's contribution remained in the shadows. Eleanor's personal life reflected her professional isolation. She never married, a choice that confounded her family and peers. Her dedication to her work left little room for social conventions, and she found greater fulfillment in her research than in the prospect of domesticity. Her relationship with Harold remained one of mutual respect and friendship, though their collaboration waned after 1915, when Harold married and relocated to Chicago to oversee a new power project. Before departing, he urged Eleanor to publish her work independently, but she hesitated, wary of the prejudice that had dogged her career. In the years that followed, Eleanor continued her research alone, patenting several improvements to hydroelectric systems under pseudonyms to avoid discrimination. Her innovations included a self-regulating turbine governor and a method for reducing cavitation, both of which enhanced the reliability of power stations. However, her health deteriorated, likely due to years of overwork and exposure to damp conditions during field tests. By the 1920s, she was a reclusive figure, known in Newford as the odd woman who tinkered with machines. Eleanor Ames passed away on June 15, 1943, at the age of 71, in the same town where she had changed the course of history. Her obituary in the Newford Gazette, a brief column overshadowed by wartime news, described her as a local eccentric with a passing interest in science. Her contributions were forgotten, buried beneath the achievements of those who had capitalized on her work. The hydroelectric industry thrived, powering cities and industries, but Eleanor's name was absent from its history. Decades later, in the early 1970s, a historian named Dr. Clara Hensley uncovered Eleanor's story while researching the origins of renewable energy. Hensley, a professor at Wellesley College, discovered a trove of documents in MIT's archives, including Eleanor's patents, correspondence with Muller, and journal entries detailing her struggles and triumphs. Intrigued, Hensley pieced together the narrative of a woman whose brilliance had been systematically overlooked. Her 1982 biography, The Silent Pioneer, Eleanor Ames and the Birth of Hydroelectric Power, was a landmark work that brought Eleanor's story to a wider audience. The book resonated with feminist scholars, environmentalists, and historians, who saw in Eleanor a symbol of resilience and innovation. Hensley's work spurred further recognition. In 1995, the Newford Hydroelectric Station was designated a historical site, and a bronze plaque was installed, bearing the inscription, "In honor of Eleanor Ames," whose visionary designs laid the foundation for hydroelectric power in America. The ceremony, attended by descendants of Abigail Thornton and local officials, was a belated acknowledgement of Eleanor's legacy. Yet, even this recognition was modest, overshadowed by the more prominent names of the era's male inventors. A call to remember. Today, hydroelectric power remains a cornerstone of global renewable energy, accounting for approximately 16% of the world's electricity production. It powers millions of homes, industries, and infrastructure, reducing reliance on fossil fuels and mitigating environmental degradation. Yet, the name Eleanor Ames remains a footnote in mainstream history, known primarily to those who seek out the stories of forgotten pioneers. Eleanor's story is a testament to the resilience of those who challenge conventions and the fragility of recognition in a world shaped by bias. She did not seek fame or fortune. Her drive was to harness the power of nature to improve the human condition. In that, she succeeded beyond measure, though the world was slow to acknowledge her role. Her life challenges us to look beyond the celebrated names, Edison, Tesla, Westinghouse, and seek out the silent innovators whose quiet revolutions shaped our present. Eleanor Ames was a visionary who saw the potential of rivers to light the future. Her legacy lives in every hydroelectric dam, every turbine that spins, every community powered by clean energy. It is time her name is spoken, her story told, and her contributions celebrated. Let us honor the forgotten woman who changed history, not by rewriting the past, but by ensuring her place in it. In remembering Eleanor, we affirm that the true measure of a pioneer is not in the applause they receive, but in the enduring impact of their vision.